it comes to video game mascots, Mario is one of the most instantly recognisable. With his distinct red and blue colour scheme, along with a host of amazing games he has starred in, it's hard to find someone today who hasn't at least heard of him. It's nearly been 40 years since Mario was first introduced, and naturally, depending on when you grew up, you play different Mario games. As for me, I had a Wii as my first console, and sunk hours upon hours into New Super Mario Bros. And the Galaxy games, and I have a special place in my heart for them. However, when I started to learn more about gaming history, and about Nintendo in particular, I wanted to try out these games that I'd never had the chance to play when I was younger. I now have a modest selection of older games, from the GameCube to the Game Boy, and along with them I've played the vast majority of the mainline Mario games. From the NES to the Switch, it's fascinating to see how the series has evolved from simple but great 2D platformers to huge-scale 3D games with a vast variety of worlds to explore. However, one game I have never played is the original Super Mario Bros. On the NES, possibly one of the most important games ever made, not just because of what the game is, but what it did to the gaming industry. So for the brief history lesson, Mario was first created in 1981 for the arcade game Donkey Kong. However, he would not get his name debut until 2 years later, with the release of Mario Bros. This arcade game's objective is to defeat all the enemies in each phase, and stars Mario and Luigi. However, the year Mario Bros. Was released, the video game crash happened. This was a huge recession in the video game industry, and stemmed from oversaturation of poor quality games on home consoles, specifically on the Atari 2600. For a couple of years, it seemed like an impossible task to sell video games, never mind a new system. But in Japan, Nintendo released the Famicom, a cutting-edge video game system that instantly saw success. Naturally, Nintendo saw its potential in the States, and on the 18th of October 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System launched, and with it came Super Mario Bros. This game was packaged with the NES for the vast majority of its life, and it was nearly impossible to find an NES owner without the game. Super Mario Bros. Set a new standard for platformers, and showed how fun and creative a game could be. But it's nearly been 35 years since the game launched in North America, so how well has it held up? At its core, Super Mario Bros. Is a simple 2D platformer. You take control as Mario and undergo the task of traversing up to 32 stages, with the goal of defeating Bowser and rescuing Princess Peach. There are 8 worlds, with 4 stages in each, and they get increasingly difficult as you progress. As someone who is not too familiar with harder 2D platformers from the 80s, I'm expecting to die a lot, so let's get right into it. Super Mario Bros. Is hard, but far from frustrating or near impossible. It's clear to see the differences that make it tougher than newer Mario games, so let's start with the controls. You have a very simple moveset. You can move forwards and backwards, as well as jump with the A button. By holding B, you can run much faster, and build up momentum, which allows you to clear more distance when running. You can also hold down to crouch, but that's about it. This game is extremely simple to understand, which is good as there's no tutorial or easing you into the game. You start the game and are placed straight into the first level, and let loose to discover how Mario controls for yourself. This is the norm for games at that time, as the NES had such a simple controller. There was no room for fancy movesets. Anyone can realise that Mario jumps when you hit the A button, but you still need to have a good understanding of how Mario controls if you want to get far in this game. But also, what about Mario's physics? Well, for a game in 1985, they feel really solid. Mario builds up speed fairly, and his jump is solid, and I feel like I'm always in control. However, my only complaint is at times Mario does feel a bit slippery, and I have ran into an enemy or fallen into a pit because of this, but it happened infrequently enough that I really wasn't bothered. Mario has 3 power-ups that he can acquire, a far cry from much newer entries, but they do suffice. You have the Super Mushroom, where Mario grows to double his height and he can now break bricks, as well as take a hit from enemies without dying. If this happens, you will shrink back to normal Mario, a standard in later 2D games. The other common power-up is the Fire Flower, which allows Mario to use fireballs, a ranged projectile which can kill enemies, some that were impossible without this power-up, such as piranha plants. However, unlike newer entries, getting hit shrinks you back down to regular Mario instead of just simply losing your fire powers. This means you can only take one hit without dying, which certainly makes you feel less safe with this power-up. However, if you still want to feel safe, the star is your best bet. This power-up gives you invincibility for a short period of time. However, you are still susceptible to falling into pits, so be sure to keep your guard up. However, the star appears very infrequently, so it doesn't make the game any less challenging. Now on to the levels themselves. Unlike later entries, each world does not have a very unique theme. There are different types of levels, such as the overworld, underground, sky ones, and underwater sections. The final level in each world is a castle, where you fight Bowser, and features lava, along with a lot of rotating fire bars and enemies. A few select worlds have warp zones, which you can access by running on top of the level. These then take you to another world, further ahead than you could go by simply completing the level. Everyone seems to take the world 4 exit and 1 2, but I'll go to world 3 instead so I can see a little bit more of the game. Focusing on level design as a whole, it's solid, but nothing amazing. Some levels feel well put together, while others feel a bit random and uncoordinated. I wouldn't say the level design is bad, but far from as consistent as newer games. The variety of blocks and enemies is very low, mind you, so the devs probably had a hard time trying to make every level unique. However, there are certain levels that do make the game very frustrating, such as the Lakitu ones. In later games, they have much better AI, but in this game I'm on constant alert. They seem to drop the spinies right on top of you, and I resorted to making a mad rush to the goal every time. And don't get me started on the hammer bros. It feels near impossible to not take damage, and I need to take a leap of faith every time I encounter them. There are the occasional hidden blocks that make me fall into a pit, and because Mario is a little slippery, I often don't stop in time and end up falling down a pit or taking damage. While it's not the developer's fault, you can't go backwards in a level, so if you want to build up speed or chase a power-up that fell behind you, you're out of luck. There are also a few underwater levels, which are not too bad actually. You move very quickly, and while the enemy placement can seem random, they are more enjoyable than later entries where your swim speed is drastically reduced. The levels are also very short compared to later entries. You can rush through them in a matter of seconds, and there usually are not many secrets or split pathways to explore. Occasionally, you will find a pipe that leads you to a subworld, which usually contains a lot of coins. If you take all the secret exits and make a beeline for the end of every level, you can beat the game in a matter of minutes, and the speedrunning community has managed to strip down the game and find every way to reduce the record. A seriously impressive task given how hard some of these moves are. However, if you want to go through every level at a slower pace, there is enough content to keep you occupied, especially for a game in 1985 where the vast majority of console games were high score based. However, there is one factor that makes beating the game a lot trickier than modern Mario games, despite how short it is, and that's the life counter. You start with 3 lives, and if you lose them all, you have to start from the very beginning. There is an exploit where you hold down A when hitting start, and it allows you to start from the beginning of the world you died in. You can gain an extra life by collecting 100 coins, but it doesn't make the game much easier. You will have to understand a lot about Mario and the levels you play if you want to get close to defeating Bowser. Because it's so hard, especially back then when video games like these were so new, it gives much more replayability, and you can set yourself a number of goals, such as beating the game without dying, without warps, with the highest score possible, etc, etc. While for most people today, it won't be an incentive to visit the title. If you only had a couple of NES games, replaying them was inevitable, and alongside the other NES launch titles, it does have a lot to offer. You don't get anything for completing the game, but it's not that big an issue for a game this old. The feeling of satisfaction when you finally defeat Bowser is more than worth it. Now let's talk about the soundtrack, which can only be described as classic. It's very simple, but contains some of the most recognisable tunes ever in a video game, The overworld theme, the underground theme, even the underwater theme are all brilliant and catchy, and they work perfectly with the game as a whole. The sound effects also pair perfectly, and again are very recognisable. All of this shows how polished the game is for back then. The sprite work is clean, the game runs smoothly. It's clear how much effort was put into making this game as perfect as possible for Mario's home console debut. Unlike some NES games, it's far from cryptic, and I very much enjoyed the time I spent with the game. If you haven't tried the game for yourself, I would strongly recommend giving it a try. The game is a great piece of history and worth your time, even now. Its graphics, level design, or gameplay may not hold up as much as later Mario games, but it's fun, and for a game like this, that's all that should matter. That's all for now. Thank you so much for watching until the end, and I really hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe as it really helps me out, as this video took a lot of effort to put together. And with that being said, I will see you all next time. Bye!